Today, international relations are the key factor in today's first story. It concerns the civil war in Yemen that ramped up 4 years ago. It's torn apart the Middle Eastern country. This isn't a simple battle between Yemeni government forces and a rebel group that wants a new government. That might have been how it started. But terrorist groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda are believed to be operating in Yemen. A famine has struck the country, civilians are starving, and the war has become international. Saudi Arabia is leading a group of nations that are attacking the rebels in Yemen, and Iran is believed to be supporting those rebels. The United States is not directly involved in Yemen, but it has given military support to Saudi Arabia and its allies. A recent CNN investigation accused Saudi Arabia of providing some American weapons and equipment to militias in Yemen. This would break the rules of America's arms sales to Saudi Arabia, according to the U.S. Department of Defense. But the top U.S. commander in the Middle East says it wouldn't be a good idea for America to stop supporting the Saudi-led group. There's a close relationship between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, and it goes back more than half a century.
The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the United States are two unexpected allies. One's an autocracy, the other a democracy. There are many differences between the two, but one thing they have in common is that each country has what the other wants. Saudi Arabia has oil and the United States has arms. To understand how reciprocal the relationship is, we need to go back to how it started. Saudi Arabia as we know it was founded in 1932 by King Abdulaziz. A few years later, oil was struck and American companies, sensing an opportunity, moved in.
It was a relationship which was based on a company, Standard Oil, in the name of the US government trying to look for access to oil resources.
This picture shows where the relationship crystallized. This was Saudi Arabia's founder, King Abdulaziz, meeting US President Franklin Roosevelt on the USS Quincy on the Suez Canal in 1945.
The United States wanted to have a secure access to the oil resources, and at the same time they would provide the Saudi Kingdom with access to arms and obviously provide protection.
As the years passed, the relationship strengthened. Standard Oil founded Aramco, the Arabian-American oil company which controlled every oil well and barrel in the country. And as the oil flowed into the US, American-made arms flowed into the kingdom. Between 1950 and 2017, Saudi Arabia bought more than $100 billion worth of arms from the US, making the kingdom the country's biggest customer. It's a relationship so strong that even when Saudi Arabia and the US are on opposite sides of an issue, arms continue to flow. For example, in 1973 and the start of the Yom Kippur War, Egypt and Syria launched a surprise offensive against Israel. The US responded supporting Israel, which Saudi opposed. The kingdom and its OPEC allies responded by setting an oil embargo, reducing production and significantly impacting the US economy. But there was no slowdown in arms sales.
If we look at the actual figures of arms supplies to Saudi Arabia from the US, we do see that that was around the time, but we really see a very significant increase in those arms supplies, which then continued over the decades. And partly this may also be related to the fact that that really was the moment that oil prices really increased very rapidly.
Even 9/11, where 15 out of the 19 attackers were Saudi, did little to rattle the arms relationship with the kingdom, which has denied any involvement in the attacks.
Around 2005, there was a dip in the volume of deliveries of weapons from the US to Saudi Arabia, but I think that didn't necessarily have to do with 9/11. I think it had more to do with the fact that Saudi Arabia didn't have the best financial conditions at that time, and that it had already stocked up on a very large quantity of advanced arms.
And in 2017, US President Donald Trump's first foreign visit was to Saudi Arabia, where he signed an arms deal said to be worth $110 billion.
For a long time, Saudi Arabia hasn't really used its equipment very much, but that started to change. In 2015, we see the let's say the full-scale military intervention by Saudi Arabia in Yemen.
The Yemen conflict has become the world's worst humanitarian crisis, with tens of thousands killed. It It's also widely seen as a proxy war between Iran and Saudi Arabia, with Houthi rebels supported by Iran and pro-government forces supported by the Saudi-led coalition. The world has changed a lot since the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the USA began. Imports of oil from the kingdom to the US have dropped by 47% since a high in 1991. Since that first accord in 1932, Saudi Arabia has had 7 kings, the US has had 14 presidents. But through it all, the bond between these two nations has remained unbreakable.